Ryan's office revenge. When I hit that emergency shutdown at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, 340 gas stations across the Memphis Petroleum corridor stopped receiving fuel quality data. Environmental monitoring systems froze mid-cycle. Pump authorization codes went dark. 6 years and 3 months of perfect EPA compliance died in the span of 3 seconds. And I watched it all happen from a corner booth at Miller's Café, drinking black coffee, while Rebecca Hayes' empire crumbled in real time on my laptop screen. But let me back up and tell you how we got there. My name is Michael Sullivan. I'm 55 years old, and I've been running independent petroleum systems consulting for 18 years now, ever since I got out of the Navy, where I spent 20 years managing fuel logistics for carrier groups. Started as an 18-year-old kid fresh out of high school, ended up running fuel operations for the entire Atlantic fleet. You learn real quick in the Navy that when your fuel monitoring fails, you don't just miss schedules, you endanger lives. I live in a decent brick house about 25 minutes outside Memphis. Got a workshop in the garage where I restore classic Chevelles and build custom hardware interfaces. No fancy website. No social media posts about innovative solutions. My clients find me when their distribution networks are falling apart and someone's career is hanging by a thread. Word travels fast in petroleum circles when you've got a reputation for fixing what others can't. The workshop is where I do my real thinking. Sarah used to joke that I spent more time out there than in the house. She wasn't wrong. After we lost her to cancer 8 years ago, those medical bills ate through most of our savings. The workshop became my sanctuary, where I could focus on building something instead of thinking about what I'd lost. Classic car restoration pays for itself, but the consulting work, that's what keeps the lights on and puts money toward what's left of retirement planning. That's how I ended up working with Apex Petroleum Distribution 6 years and 3 months ago. Brian Patterson, their operations director back then, called me on a Thursday morning. His voice had that edge you hear when a man's looking at his pension disappearing. "Michael, we just failed our 3rd EPA compliance audit in 18 months. Environmental Protection Agency is talking about pulling our retail permits. I need someone who understands how this stuff actually works, not some consultant who learned petroleum from a textbook." Brian was old-school Navy, like me. Came up through the ranks managing fuel depots at Norfolk before computers ran everything. We'd actually crossed paths years back during a joint logistics exercise. He understood that behind every dashboard and fancy display, there's actual equipment that has to function in the real world, and more importantly, someone who knows how to make it work. When I walked into their facility that first day, the chaos was obvious. Trucks queued at loading terminals with no coordination. Station managers calling in blind because their monitoring systems showed conflicting data. Environmental sensors throwing alerts that nobody knew how to interpret. Delivery schedules backed up because dispatch couldn't tell which tanks needed fuel and which were overfilled. "We've got 4 different software systems that don't communicate," Brian explained, walking me through the control center. "Fuel quality monitoring uses one program. The delivery tracking uses another. Environmental compliance is mostly manual entry, and retail pump authorization is a complete mess. Every shift change, we lose 3 hours just trying to sync everyone up. The EPA boys are threatening $50,000 daily fines if we don't get compliant. I spent the next 20 months building them a real system, not some off-the-shelf package that sort of works if you bend your operation to fit it. This wasn't just software, it was a complete infrastructure overhaul. Custom fuel quality algorithms that learned the specific delivery patterns of Memphis petroleum traffic. Environmental monitoring that actually communicated with EPA databases in real time. Jeep's integration that tracked every tanker truck and adjusted schedules based on traffic, weather, and fuel demand patterns. 75,000 lines of code, but that's just the software side. I designed custom hardware interfaces that could talk to equipment from 6 different manufacturers, built environmental sensor arrays that could detect leak signatures down to parts per million, created backup systems that would kick in automatically if any component failed. The Navy taught me that redundancy isn't optional, it's survival. Every critical system had to have at least 2 ways to fail safely. Every data stream had to be verified by independent sensors. Every decision point had to log what happened and why. Because when the EPA comes asking questions, I don't know isn't an acceptable answer. Brian understood what real engineering looks like. He'd ask detailed questions about sensor placement and backup protocols. He wanted to know why I positioned monitoring equipment where I did, how the algorithms handled edge cases, what happened if communication links went down. Smart questions from someone who'd managed complex systems under pressure. The results were immediate and dramatic. 0 environmental violations. No more pump downtime from system conflicts, fuel flowing through the network like a well-oiled machine, which it literally was. EPA auditors came through twice after implementation and couldn't find a single compliance issue. What used to take 12 people to coordinate manually now ran smoothly with 4. Brian would send me emails with real substance, not corporate thank you notes, but detailed reports on efficiency improvements and cost savings. Monthly operational reviews where he'd share specific metrics, delivery times down 23%, environmental incident reports down to 0, fuel waste reduced by 15%. He understood what he was paying for, and, more importantly, what he was getting. The contract was crystal clear. They leased operational access to my system. I retained full ownership of all code, algorithms, and infrastructure. Brian signed it without hesitation because he understood the difference between using something and owning it. You don't buy a custom petroleum monitoring system like you're purchasing office equipment. You license access to infrastructure that took years to develop and requires ongoing maintenance from the person who built it. Every month for over 6 years, the system performed exactly as designed, and every month Brian's payment arrived exactly on time. For over 6 years, everything ran perfectly. The system evolved as their operations grew. When they added new stations, I integrated them seamlessly. When EPA regulations changed, I updated the compliance protocols before their legal department even knew new rules existed. Brian would call occasionally with questions about optimization or expansion possibilities, always respectful of the boundaries we'd established, always understanding that he was talking to the guy who'd built this thing from the ground up. We'd grab lunch sometimes, usually at that little barbecue place near his office. Navy talk mostly, old ships we'd served on, guys we both knew, stories about the kind of screw-ups that happen when people don't respect complex systems. Brian got it. He'd seen what happens when some hotshot thinks he can run a fuel depot without understanding how fuel flows, how pumps work, how environmental systems interact with safety protocols. "You know what I appreciate about working with you, Michael?" he said one afternoon over pulled pork sandwiches. "You don't just fix problems, you prevent them. That's worth its weight in gold when you're dealing with the EPA and environmental liability." That was Brian. He understood that good engineering isn't flashy. It's reliable. It works when you need it to work, and it fails safely when something goes wrong. Then Brian retired last spring. I should have seen what was coming. 3 weeks after his retirement party, Rebecca Hayes arrived with her MBA from some prestigious business school and her leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly house payment. Early 30s, designer everything, and the kind of confident smile people wear when they think they've just inherited the keys to the kingdom. Her bio in the company newsletter read like a corporate fantasy. Top 10% of her MBA class. Previous experience in operational efficiency optimization at 3 different companies, specialization in vendor relationship management, and cost structure analysis. What it didn't mention was any actual experience running petroleum operations, managing environmental compliance, or understanding what happens when complex technical systems fail. Her first email wasn't a greeting or an introduction. Subject line: Vendor Expense Optimization Review. The message was pure corporate speak about recurring expenditure analysis and third-party dependency evaluation. My invoice hadn't changed in over 6 years. Same amount, same schedule, same scope of work. But Rebecca saw a line item on a budget sheet and immediately assumed there was waste to be cut. I replied politely, attaching the original contract and a brief summary of system performance metrics. Professional courtesy. Nothing more. 0 environmental violations in 6 years. EPA audit results consistently clean. Operational efficiency improvements worth millions in avoided fines and improved throughput. Numbers that should have told any competent manager they were looking at a success story, not a cost problem. Her response came back within 2 hours. Need to schedule comprehensive review of all external service agreements. Please prepare documentation for internal assessment of operational frameworks. Operational frameworks. That phrase told me everything I needed to know about Rebecca Hayes. She was the kind of executive who thought complex technical infrastructure could be understood by reading bullet points on a PowerPoint slide. The type who'd walk into a nuclear power plant and ask why they needed so many pipes and gauges when modern systems should be simpler. I started preparing, not documentation for her assessment, but the tools I'd need when this conversation went exactly where I knew it was heading. 3 days later, the email I'd been expecting arrived. Subject line: Software Package Requirements. Rebecca requested a complete copy of the system for internal evaluation and potential transition planning. She wanted all source code, database schemas, hardware specifications, and administrative credentials for comprehensive review by our IT department. That's when I knew for certain she didn't want to review our service agreement. She wanted to steal my system. I drafted a response that was technically accurate and completely unhelpful, happy to provide everything included under your current lease agreement. Then I attached the same contract Brian had signed 6 years ago, with the ownership clause highlighted in bold. The next morning brought another email from Rebecca. Subject line: Contract Clarification Request. She wanted to know whether the operational logic framework belonged to Apex Petroleum distribution. Operational logic framework. That's what she called 6 years and 3 months of custom-built fuel monitoring algorithms, environmental compliance protocols, and real-time optimization engines, like it was some kind of corporate asset she could inventory and transfer between departments. Her follow-up emails got increasingly demanding. She wanted technical documentation that didn't exist because the system was custom-built, not assembled from standard components. She wanted vendor support contacts for hardware I'd designed and built myself. She wanted training materials for software that required years of petroleum industry experience to understand properly. I screenshot the relevant contract clause and sent it back to her. Bold text, impossible to misinterpret. All system logic, design, architecture, and source code remains the sole property of Michael Sullivan. Licensed for operational use only. No resale, no replication, no derivative works. Brian had understood that clause perfectly when he signed it. It wasn't legal mumbo-jumbo. It was basic business reality. You can't separate custom engineering from the engineer who created it. You can't take a system designed for one specific operation and expect it to work somewhere else without the person who understands every component, every decision, every trade-off that went into building it. 2 hours later, Rebecca's response landed in my inbox. "We will be transitioning to internal infrastructure solutions effective immediately. Thank you for your service." That was it. No discussion, no transition planning, no acknowledgement that she was about to disconnect the central nervous system of their entire operation. Just corporate speak for "you're fired and we're keeping your stuff." I leaned back in my desk chair and looked out the window at my workshop. Inside that converted garage bay sat the physical control panel I'd built specifically for the Apex system. Custom hardware interface with dedicated switches for every major subsystem. Fuel quality monitoring, environmental compliance, delivery tracking, pump authorization, all of it flowing through circuits I'd soldered by hand. Rebecca Hayes had no idea that control panel existed. She thought the system was just software running on their computers. She was about to learn the difference between a user interface and actual infrastructure. You see, when you build a system from the ground up, you build it the way Navy engineers build things, with manual overrides. Every automated process needs a human backup. Every remote operation needs a local control option. Every system needs a way to shut down safely when something goes wrong. That control panel wasn't just monitoring equipment. It was the actual nerve center of the entire Petroleum network. Rebecca thought she could fire the engineer and keep the engineering. That's like firing the pilot but expecting the plane to keep flying itself. 4 days after her termination email, a calendar invite appeared. Service Transition Discussion. Thursday, 2:00 p.m. Central. No agenda, no context, just a meeting title that suggested she expected this to be a simple handoff conversation. I could already picture how this would go. Rebecca would bring her procurement team, maybe legal counsel, and they'd politely demand I turn over everything they thought they owned. I joined the video call 5 minutes early, clean polo shirt, background showing my home office with my Navy commendation certificates visible on the wall. Professional appearance, nothing flashy. The kind of setup that says competent engineer without saying guy who's about to teach you an expensive lesson. Rebecca logged in 3 minutes late, settling into her chair with that satisfied expression executives get when they think they've solved a complex problem with simple cost cutting. She had backup this time, Jennifer Roberts from procurement and Jason Walsh, the operations supervisor who'd inherited my old working relationship with Brian. Jason looked uncomfortable. He knew what my system did, even if he didn't know how it did it. He'd been around long enough to remember what operations looked like before I fixed everything. "Michael, thanks for joining us," Rebecca began, her tone suggesting this was just a routine administrative task. "We've made the decision to bring infrastructure management in-house. I appreciate all your work up to this point, but we're ready to take control of operations internally. Take control. As if clicking through a user interface was the same thing as operating the underlying system." I kept my expression neutral. "You're ending the lease. Agreement. Is that correct?" "Correct." Rebecca leaned back in her chair like she expected congratulations for her decisive leadership. "We'll need complete handover of all code, system diagrams, and back-end credentials. Standard transition process." Jennifer Roberts nodded approvingly, probably thinking this was just another vendor termination. Jason Walsh said nothing, but I could see him doing mental calculations about what this meant for his daily operations. I didn't move. "You're not licensed to access the core infrastructure. Your agreement covers operational use of the system outputs. You never purchased ownership rights." Rebecca's confident smile flickered for just a moment. "We paid for development of this system, Michael. That makes it our intellectual property. This is standard business practice." I leaned forward slightly. "You paid for access to a functioning petroleum monitoring network. You never bought the underlying technology. That distinction is clearly outlined in Section 4 of your contract." She glanced away from the camera, probably pulling up the contract on another screen. I waited while she scanned through language that Brian Patterson had reviewed carefully with their legal team 6 years ago. Language written by someone who understood the difference between licensing and ownership. "Look," she said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "We understand there might be some technical complexities here, but we're prepared to handle operations internally going forward. Just send us whatever files you have so we can maintain continuity." "I'll provide everything you're legally entitled to receive," I replied. Nothing more. The silence stretched across the video call. Jennifer Roberts looked uncomfortable. Jason Walsh stopped taking notes. Rebecca's jaw tightened as she realized this wasn't going to be the simple asset transfer she'd planned. "That'll be fine," she said finally, trying to end the call quickly. "We'll expect delivery by end of business, tomorrow." The screen went black, and I closed my laptop. I walked out to my workshop and powered up the control panel. Every indicator light showed green. Environmental sensors synchronized across 340 retail locations. Fuel quality calculations updating in real time. Pump authorizations flowing smoothly through the network. The Memphis Petroleum corridor running exactly as I designed it to run. Then I started building Rebecca's transition package. Professional-looking documentation with clean diagrams and impressive technical terminology. User interface screenshots showing dashboard layouts and data visualization panels. System architecture diagrams that looked comprehensive but showed only the surface layer. Everything polished and official-looking and completely useless without access to the underlying control systems. You know what the beautiful thing about good documentation is? It can look complete while telling you absolutely nothing about how the system actually works, like giving someone a car manual that explains how to read the speedometer but doesn't mention where the engine is. By 6 p.m., I had a professional-looking package ready for delivery. I attached it to an email with a single line of explanation. System interface documentation provided per contract termination. No back-end access included. I hit send and watched the message disappear into corporate email systems where Rebecca Hayes would soon discover the difference between owning a steering wheel and owning the engine. Then I walked back out to my workshop, sat down at the control panel, and placed my hand on the master shutdown switch. The real lesson was about to begin. The next morning, I drove to Miller's Café like it was any other Tuesday, ordered my usual black coffee, and settled into the corner booth where I could see the parking lot through the window. Same booth where Sarah and I used to have breakfast on Sunday mornings before her treatments. Some routines you keep because they remind you what's important. I opened the administrative console and brought up the main dashboard. Every indicator showed green. Environmental monitoring flowing smoothly through 47 sensor arrays, 340 gas stations receiving real-time fuel quality data, delivery scheduling cycling efficiently through 23 distribution terminals. Everything Rebecca Hayes thought she now controlled was actually flowing through the custom hardware sitting in my workshop 25 minutes away. At 2:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Having trouble accessing route management system. Can you provide login credentials?" I deleted the message without responding. At 2:47 p.m., I toggled the master relay switch. The map on my screen froze instantly. Every green indicator went gray. Real-time data feeds dropped to 0. Environmental monitoring stopped mid-cycle. The entire Memphis Petroleum network just stopped talking. I took a slow sip of coffee and watched 6 years and 3 months of perfect EPA compliance die in complete silence. The system didn't crash or throw error messages. I designed it to fail gracefully. No alarms, no warning lights, no dramatic shutdown sequences, just clean disconnection from all operational control. For the first 12 minutes, nothing appeared wrong to casual observation. The interface dashboard still showed green status indicators based on cached data. Dispatchers looking at their screens would see normal traffic patterns and delivery schedules. Station managers would see fuel levels and pump status that looked current. But underneath, nothing was actually communicating with anything else. I pulled up the live camera feeds from major distribution terminals that I could access through public traffic monitoring systems. At 2:58 p.m., I watched a delivery truck sit at a red light that should have changed to green 45 seconds earlier. The signal timing protocol was frozen, unable to adjust for real-time traffic conditions. At 3:02 p.m., 2 tanker trucks arrived simultaneously at the same loading terminal. According to their onboard systems, both had valid assignments for Bay 3 at the Western Distribution Center. The dock assignment algorithm wasn't running to prevent conflicts. I watched both drivers get out and start arguing about who belonged where. By 3:15 p.m., the ripple effects became visible across the network. Environmental sensors showing inconsistent readings because the calibration protocols weren't updating. Fuel quality alerts backing up in unmonitored queues because the analysis software couldn't communicate with the testing equipment. Pump authorization requests timing out across 127 retail locations because the payment processing system couldn't verify tank levels. My phone started ringing at 3:22 p.m. Unknown. Memphis number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call from a different number. Then a third. Jason Walsh trying to reach me from his personal phone, his office phone, probably borrowing other people's phones, when I didn't answer. The panic was beginning to set in at apex. At 3:35 p.m., the first confused email arrived. Subject line, quick question, environmental data sync issue. Hi Michael, getting some weird delays on EPA compliance reporting. Environmental sensors aren't updating properly. Can you take a look when you have a chance? Thanks, Jason Walsh. Jason was being diplomatic. He knew something was seriously wrong, but didn't want to sound alarmist in case this was just a routine technical glitch. He still thought this could be resolved with a quick phone call. By 4:00 p.m., the emails were arriving every few minutes. Route data not updating. Signal timing problems at North Gate. Multiple trucks assigned to same bay. Still polite. Still assuming this was some kind of system hiccup that could be resolved with technical support. At 4:15 p.m., the tone shifted. Urgent. Environmental compliance system completely offline. EPA monitoring shows multiple violations accumulating. Need immediate response. At 4:23 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Emergency situation. Call immediately. I deleted the message and ordered another cup of coffee. By 4:30 p.m., I had 47 missed calls and 23 unread voicemails. The Memphis Petroleum corridor was experiencing what the Navy would call a cascading systems failure. Environmental monitors were detecting leak signatures that weren't being processed. Fuel deliveries were backing up because drivers couldn't get authorization to pump. Retail locations were starting to run dry because the automated reorder system wasn't communicating with supply scheduling. Conservative estimate from my monitoring tools, $95,000 in daily losses from delayed deliveries, environmental violations, and missed sales. Real number was probably higher once you factored in EPA fines and potential permit suspensions. At 4:47 p.m., the calendar invite arrived. Emergency conference call, immediate response required. I joined the call at 4:58 p.m. Professional, appearance, calm demeanor, sitting in my home office with my engineering certificates visible in the background. The screen filled with stressed executives in various stages of crisis management. Timothy Coleman, some kind of senior VP, looked like he'd spent the last 2 hours in emergency meetings. Tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, the look of a man who'd been pulled out of whatever he was doing to deal with a company-threatening crisis. Legal counsel had joined. 2 attorneys, one taking rapid notes on a legal pad, the other reviewing documents on a second monitor. Jason Walsh was there, looking exhausted but unsurprised, like he'd been expecting this conversation for months. Rebecca Hayes was positioned in a small window in the bottom corner, muted microphone, body language that suggested she'd been excluded from leadership of her own crisis. Timothy cleared his throat and dove straight into damage control mode. "Michael, appreciate you joining on short notice. We're dealing with what appears to be a significant system disruption. Our operations are effectively paralyzed, and we need to understand our options for immediate restoration." I nodded once. "Your system lease was terminated yesterday. Emergency restoration service is available for 3 times standard monthly rate. Payment required by wire transfer before reactivation." The legal counsel leaned into her camera. "Michael, we've reviewed your proposal. Some of the financial terms seem elevated given the circumstances." "Emergency response pricing," I replied. "Standard practice when critical infrastructure fails during business hours." Jason Walsh spoke up, his voice tight with fatigue. "Michael, we've got 340 retail locations showing environmental violations. EPA compliance is completely offline. Our liability exposure is massive. 4 major customers have already called threatening contract termination if we don't restore normal operations by tomorrow morning." Timothy jumped back in. "Look, we understand there may have been some communication issues during the transition process, but we need to focus on solutions. Can we discuss modification of the emergency terms?" "No." The single word hung in the air. No explanation, no negotiation, no corporate back and forth. Just a simple statement of fact. Rebecca finally unmuted her microphone. "This is unreasonable, Michael. You're holding our entire operation hostage over a contract dispute." I looked directly into the camera. "You terminated my services and demanded handover of infrastructure you never purchased. I provided exactly what your contract entitled you to receive. Nothing more, nothing less." Timothy looked at his legal team, then back at the camera. "We need 5 minutes to discuss internally." 22 minutes later, my banking app chimed. Payment confirmed, amount correct, no complications. I walked out to my workshop, sat down at the control panel, and flipped the master switch back to active. Every screen in my house lit up with green indicators. Environmental sensors reconnecting in sequence, fuel quality calculations resuming, delivery schedules updating in real time, Jeep's tracking coming back online. The Memphis Petroleum corridor came back to life, like someone had just restarted the circulatory system of a major metropolitan area. 2 weeks later, the new contract arrived. 3-year exclusive agreement, enhanced compensation, priority consideration for future expansion projects, ironclad ownership protections. Rebecca Hayes's name was nowhere on the signature page. Sometimes the most important lesson you can teach someone is the difference between having access to something and actually controlling it. In business, like in the Navy, respect for expertise isn't just professional courtesy, it's operational necessity.